Hello, bonjour, everybody. Thank you for the intro. I really appreciate it.
Sorry, Marcy, do you think it was warm enough?
I don't know at this point. What do you think about it?
I don't think it was warm enough. So
A second one?
I would like you all to stand up, please.
Yes, for the people online, just to show them
to show
that
how-
we
how
are
warm
here,
We
okay?
can give a welcome to
Oh,
Yuna.
hello.
Yes, warm up for you now. See, this is how we do it in React Paris, people.
You look amazing. Thank you for that intro. Thank you all for coming early and being here. Thank you for having me in this beautiful city, in this beautiful venue. I don't know if you've walked around the campus. I did this morning, and it is stunning. So, another thing I'm excited to do is to be here to talk to you at this React conference about CSS and HTML, one of my favorite things to do. Slides, please. There we go. So here I am talking to you about better, faster, stronger web UI. Do you all know Daft Punk? Da-da-da-da-do-do-do. OK, so I didn't get to walk onto that music, but let's pretend. Let's just envision that we're singing along karaoke style. There's a lot that's been happening in the web UI space. Web UI has been evolving faster than ever. And I'm not talking about one browser landing a bunch of stuff. I'm talking about all of the browsers working together to make this a much more robust space for capabilities, for CSS, for HTML. Making your lives easier is the goal. So I want to talk to you today about better UI capabilities, faster performance benefits to these features, and stronger, resilient components. And a big part of this is not just me saying write less JavaScript at a JavaScript conference to all of you React folks. It's about making sense of your code base. It's about separating your application logic from your styling logic. Because it doesn't make sense to me that you have to write scripting to style a dropdown. You have to write scripts to make something animate on a scroller instead of a timer. Why do we have these differences? We have all these gaps in the web platform that we're trying to fix, and we're doing a lot to fix them right now. And another important point here is it helps you stop writing unnecessary thread blocking JavaScript because these features come from the browser directly, and they work off the main thread in many cases, in all these cases. So let's start with better UI capabilities. This is a space that I've been heavily involved in. And the first feature is the popover attribute. Who here has heard of popover, used popover? OK, who here uses GitHub? So you've used components with popover because they use popover in GitHub already. And makes it easier to do this kind of stuff. What a beautiful vision for the web. But I'm kidding. It also is really everywhere, all over the web platform. You can see it on Airbnb for menus, for selects, for even just filtering. Like these experiences are called layered UI experiences. You have layers on top of the page. And they're all over the platform. So the popover attribute is a built-in feature that provides accessibility support, so you don't have to add all those ARIA roles. It gives you keyboard behavior, state management. You get top layer support, so you don't have to try to make z-index work and do z-index 9999999. And you can also get light dismiss behavior without having any added scripting. And one of the most exciting things about popover now is that it's almost landed cross-browser. It's going to come in Firefox 125, which is landing in mid-May. So that's like I'm counting down the days that this comes to the browser, because it also means that you no longer need to really use React portals for a lot of things. When we talked to the GitHub team and another partner, they both said they stopped using portals for their components when they were able to replace it with popover. So that's nice. One less thing to worry about. You can just use native elements and they work. So in order to make a popover, what you need is the popover attribute. So you specify popover on the element that you're doing a popover on. In this case, it's a div. Then you give it an ID. So very creative here, my popover. And you align it. You have to connect it to a button, something that's going to open the popover. So we do that with popover target. And you set that to the ID of the popover. Pretty simple, declarative, no scripting needed. But what that gives you is this. you get a popover. I can hit escape to escape it. I can hit spacebar to enter it. I can click into it, click off of it, and it automatically closes. This is called light dismiss. All the accessibility states of that interaction are built into the browser. You don't have to worry about ARIA Live. Focus is managed. And all of this is done with a couple of lines of code declaratively in your HTML, which is super, super powerful, or your JSX, or however you're writing this. So you also get a couple of other niceties with popover. This is called a manual popover, so you can set up a button with popover target action, and you set the popover type to manual. By default, if you just have the popover attribute, it's popover equals auto, you get the light dismiss. Popover equals manual means I want the behavior where clicking away, clicking outside of that popover doesn't like dismiss it. I want to then create a specific button that's my close button, and hide it with popover target action closes. You get all of this built in to the browser, so pretty powerful. And you also probably want to animate popovers, and this is a bit of a complex feature. So to animate popovers, we have a couple of attributes and features and pseudo elements. There's popover open, which is the open state of popover. And if you've used dialog, you've likely seen the open attribute on dialog. Well, popover itself is an attribute, so you can't have an attribute on an attribute. We have a pseudo class, popover open. There's also starting style to tell the browser what the style is before it animates in. Allow discrete lets you animate discrete properties. This means animating from and to display none, which has a ton of utility beyond popover. And then overlay as well for how the behavior overlays into the top layer on top of the rest of the page, and how anything like backdrop would fade in. Top layer is pretty cool because not only do you not have to worry about z-index, it's a new thing, its own slate, a clean slate. Like if you've ever used CSS layers, it sort of overrides the rest of the page. So you could have z-index 99999, but top layer, z-index 1 would always override that. So an example of animating popovers is this. You might have some kind of settings and see how this animates in from the bottom and then out through the top. You can specify this, how it fades in, how it disappears, and it goes to display none, but you see this nice transition or animation in and out. And the way that we do that is by setting up popover open. So this is the first thing. This is before it opens. We're saying that we want to transform this from translate y 20 pixels, that's from the bottom, opacity 0. Then when you open it, you want to transform it to 0, so you undo that animation, give it an opacity 1. And then when it exits, you translate y negative 50 pixels, so like up to the top, and the opacity of 0 again. So then another thing that we need to do here is this allow discrete keyword on display. This is the magic that lets us animate discrete properties, because we can't break the web by just enabling this in browsers. So there's a keyword that you need to set to enable that behavior, so it's forward-facing and doesn't break backwards compatibility. You probably have built stuff like this too, like a simple to-do list app that deletes and adds elements. And here we will mix a little bit of JavaScript because we want to actually delete these parent nodes. So you might want to have a set timeout. In the meantime, have a class that is deleting, but you don't have to apply the styles in JavaScript to have it actually style the entry and exit animations. You can just give it a class, remove the class, and delete the node. And then in the meantime, we can set this up in the same way. We have the transition. We're animating the display with allow discrete. We're animating the opacity along with it. And then you have this is deleting class so that you go from 1 to 0 for opacity, display block to display none. And then there's this little skew animation with a little translate that I've added here. So it plays beautifully with DOM destruction, DOM addition, removal. But it lets you separate those actions with your style, doing style, and your scripting, doing actual scripting and page manipulation. And you can also do things like this, where you can delete these cards and it'll readjust. Keep this in mind. We'll make this look prettier later. So the next very, very, very exciting addition is anchor positioning. And this is a feature that's very close to my heart because it feels like I've been working on this for many years. So have you ever built an element that anchors to another element, like a menu, like any kind of tooltip, a dropdown? Who here has built something like that? OK, so do you remember the pain of viewport management? Do you remember the pain of making it appear in the optimal state? I see people in the back like, yes. The pain of all of the state management, from keyboard navigation to accessibility to focus, all of that you have to re-implement every single time, or use a third-party library, which might be hard to customize. Oh, shakes fist at sky. So we got to fix this. And this API has been through so many iterations. There was an I2S, there was pushback and feedback on the spec, and it's changed and improved and made the developer ergonomics so much better. This is being actively worked on. In the past 3 weeks, there were 3 working group breakout sessions to finalize a bunch of open spec issues for Anchor v1, so it's actively happening. And similarly to popover, there's a very declarative way to set up anchoring. So if you recall with this popover, we had the popover and the ID. Now you want to set an ID on the button or the thing that you're anchoring from. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a popover. This could be any 2 elements. But it makes a ton of sense with popover because with popover, you're in the top layer. So you need to tell the browser like where you want to put it, right? And how you want to connect it to the rest of your page. So this is actually super, super magic because it lets you not only take advantage of the top layer, that portaling capability to be on your DOM, but also connects it to pieces within the UI. So set up that ID on the button. Then we want to set up the anchor. So the anchor links to that ID. So it's pretty straightforward. You have your popover, and you have your anchor. And you can also do this in CSS. So there are ways to set it up in CSS. There's a few options for you. So once you have that, you can do something like this, where you have those little settings popovers linking to the buttons that we're clicking for that popover to open. Just a couple of lines of code more. So in order to do that, like what we can do is do this a few ways. First, you can use the anchor function to actually calculate the position. We can give it a spacer. That's like what I left room for the arrow. And then position it from the bottom at the top of the anchor, and then the right at the right of the anchor. So this is one way to do the positioning. Really, really handy. Another way is a new feature called inset area for layout. This is really neat because it lets you lay things out in a 9-column grid based on the position of your anchor. So in that case, it would be top, span left. So you start at the top, and then you span to the left. And to make this a little bit easier, I built this quick little tool. This literally landed in Canary yesterday, so I had to update all the syntax of this, by the way. I was like, "Rah." And so here we have inset area top, where it's setting it up at the top of the anchor. This one is top span left, just like in that last example. So it starts at the top, spans to the left. Top span right is top span right. Left, inset area, bottom, right. And then you can do top left. You could do top right. And you can use this combination of spanning and positioning to really clearly and declaratively stay where you want this to appear. So we have this new syntax that you can use, that you can update, that you can change for anchor positioning using insets. And I think that this is really powerful. So let's take a look at that again. Here you have your popover. You would set position absolute because the popover is fixed by the user agent styles by default because it's taking up that whole page, kind of like dialog. So then you would set inset area, top, span left. And then here I have margin bottom, say 1 rem, just to give it that space for the arrow. You could do a pseudo element for the arrow. But I really like the syntax a lot more than the top left, bottom right syntax. But both work, and both are available to you. So this gets even more magical and complex when you can actually tell the browser how you want the popover to shift when it doesn't have enough room in the viewport. And this is using position try options. So here I have 2 examples where I've set up position try, and you're telling the browser to first try to position it at the top with inset area top. And I'm naming it top, so I'm giving it this name, like a variable. Then I'm setting up position try bottom, inset area on the bottom. And on that popover, I can set up the position try options to be first try the top, then try the bottom. And there's also a way to specify which one to pick. So you could do most height, most inline size, or block size. And this is a way to determine how you want the browser to present this to you without having to do all the calculation logic that I know is super, super heavy. The resize observers, the scroll observers, like all of this is done for you in the browser off the main thread. And it gets even better because you don't even have to write those positions. You don't have to write the position try. You can just use these auto-flip keywords. So now what we can do is with position try options, instead of creating custom positions, you can say flip inline or flip block, flip block, flip inline, flip both. So this is a way to set it up so that you don't have to write those. You could just say, OK, so I have my position, top left. First thing I want to try is flipping it inline, then flip it block. So it kind of has that center of focus that lets you do all this cool stuff. It's such a good feature for the browser. And you can combine it with other things, like popover with anchor is really, really, really effective. And then this also uses CSS trigonometric functions to do this like cool, smooth menu animation. It's like Pinterest inspired. And it lets you do a ton of interesting stuff. So with the trigonometric functions, I don't know if you've played with this yet in CSS, but another feature that you can no longer require you to like have to write a separate script file for to do the calculations, CSS in Calc now has trig functions. So you can use cosine, you can use sine, you can use pow, like there's a bunch of them, tangent, atan. And in this case, we're using, remember geometry, like remember how we can find the position on a circular plane. We use the cosine of the angle times the radius, and then the sine of the angle times the radius for the x and y positions. So for each of those elements, it looks like this, where we give them all the radius of this button. So in this case, I have like that center button and the outside button and then a spacer between them, right? So that's the radius. And then the transform here is just directly in styles, where you would translate x and you'd calculate the cosine of the angle times the radius. And that's the x position. And then the y position is the sine of the angle times -1, so it flips this way, and then times the radius. So in 2 lines of code, we get all of that power, plus a transition. This is the transition. For each of those buttons, I have a little delay, so it kind of goes, and it's like a whole experience here. And because it's using popover, I get the light dismiss. I can tab into it. I can tab through it. I can hit escape, and it closes. There's all of these capabilities built in that you don't have to manage yourself. And with anchor, you could have this anywhere on the page. So I can have many menus that are anchoring to different little buttons that open up those menus. And this is an experience that we see often on the web platform. So, and thing to note is that popover has no default semantic role. It is an attribute that provides behavior and behavior-based accessibility. But you can add roles. So you can do role equals menu or tooltip. If you're creating dialogue type content where you want to inert the rest of the page and make it non-interactive, you can create a dialogue element. Who here has used dialogue? Has anyone implemented that? Because it is stable. OK, so some of you. So dialogue is really cool, too. And dialogue does, for a modal, require you to have scripting to enable it. But there's been a lot of work that's being done right now to make it more popover-like and declarative. One of those things is invoke target that lets you set an invoke target on the dialogue like popover target and open it declaratively, the way that I showed you can with popover. There's also work being done right now to make it light dismissible, which is hard right now because it inerts the rest of the page. So there's a proposal for closed by any, and it lets you close the dialogue by any interaction. So lots of work being done there for popover and dialogue. And then for selections, I'll talk about select and select v2. Styling dropdowns. Oh. Unfortunately, this one isn't ready quite yet. But it's coming. They are coming. This has been such a necessary feature, a long time coming. And I'll show you some live demos. These are all live in Chrome. This is the select for GitHub. You might be familiar. And what's really cool about this feature is it uses something called selected option, where in this first option, it says create a merge commit. But when you click on it, it says merge pull request in that little button. And all this is using is it mimics the HTML. So I have a hidden title that I'm showing when I click it, which doesn't appear in this part of the UI for the options. And I can just display none, display block, the different things I want shown in the button versus the content. So you get a lot of control here with what you're showcasing. You get this little like checkbox you can style, the menu. And something like this, like Airbnb also uses this. So an example here is like this region picker. You get all of like that tab navigation. Oops, I tabbed into the next slide. And because it's an element, you can use media queries and container queries and make this like a responsive, stylable drop-down menu by using this new feature. You could do something as simple as, who knew we'd want to style backdrops or fonts? in dropdowns. Who knew? The Gmail example where you might have some text in that dropdown in the select, but you just want to show for brevity of space an icon, and then the country select. So this has gone through a lot of iterations. The current iteration looks like this, where we're reusing the select element, which is pretty cool. And then you have the button here with selected option to showcase, what is actually being selected in this dropdown. Within that, you use data list. And data list is something that exists right now in HTML, but it's very not used and never used in select. So we're bringing that back, making data list happen. And then within this, we have images, text. You can create arbitrary content inside of the dropdown. What is really cool about reusing select is that it is backwards compatible. So for older browsers, it'll just look like a dropdown where it'll ignore the button, the selected option, all the data list, and the images, and it'll look for text, and it'll represent the text content, the text nodes within the options. So you still get content for a fallback, but you don't get this style and the customization. So that's where we're at with select. All right, I only have 10 minutes left, so let's talk about interactions now. So have you used scroll-driven animations before? Or GSAP, or something like that, to create interactions on the page? Well, they're cool. So there's a couple features that have landed in Chrome and also are available behind a flag in Firefox. And view timeline, animation timeline, and the view function are some of them. I will quickly talk about this. They let you create cool things like this sort of like credit card pattern where I can scroll and then have this animation moving in. And I'm also using the ray function to have this move on a circular plane in CSS. So with it, you can also do like this scrolly-telling type thing where things like kind of slide in like smoothly from the side, like, ooh, look at that. Like this pizza. Have any of you been to Pink Mama, by the way? I love that pizza place. It's delicious. I've gone twice now when I've come to Paris, and it's like a go-to. Anyway, the pizza reminded me of it because I ate a lot of it yesterday. So look at these beautiful little, things just moving in. And the way to do this is a pretty small snippet as well. You don't need added scripts, scroll observers, all of that stuff to do this. You just create a keyframe. This is called fly-in. It's going to transform the position from negative 100 pixels to 0, the initial position, and animate the opacity. And then now we can, in CSS, just say that I want to use this animation on a timeline. So instead of just being able to animate based on a timer, which is like 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, you can set the animation timeline, which can be the view. It can be any sub-scroller. And you can get really complex with this. Some of you might know Bramis Van Dam. He's on my team. He's built a ton of really cool scroll-driven animations demos. One of my favorite, actually, is this stacking cards demo, where you have the ability to set position fixed on the cards as they scroll up, and then scroll them away when you're ready with that, with just declarative styles. You can also use the JavaScript API for this too. I like to show the CSS because I feel like it's just so clear and simple to write. Here's another example of just like showing different scroll directions, and a bunch more on scroll-driven animations.style. I definitely recommend you bookmark this page if you want to learn more. There's more demos. It shows you how to write the code in different approaches, so CSS or JavaScript, and way more inspiration there. So as I was mentioning, performance is something that I want to briefly talk about here. Because this does not occupy the main thread, there is significant performance improvements, and one of our partners said it improved utilization of I don't even remember what utilization it was, like, I think GPU or CPU utilization from 50% to 2% while scrolling when adding this feature, the scroll-driven animations API. So really cool to see these features landing not only to make it more declarative and easier to write code, but actually improve your user's experience. User experience is a huge part of the success of your product. So always something to keep in mind, not just on page load, but during page interaction. And speaking of animations, view transitions. Yee. View transitions are awesome. I see in the back Elias going like this. view transitions are really cool. There's a lot of great integrations as well with React, with Astro, with Svelte, with a bunch of frameworks and tools that you likely use every day. They landed last year in March for single-page applications, same document view transitions, and there's been a ton of work on multi-page view transitions that we'll probably talk more about in a couple of weeks. But multi-page view transitions are coming. If you want to follow along, there's a ton of actually a lot of closed issues now that discuss how you can do that with a couple of new features and pre-rendering, and it's very exciting. So if you remember this demo where I'm sort of animating out with a fade out these cards, if I just add a little bit of code for the view transition, so here I'm saying if document.start view transition, if we can actually do this, then start the view transition and just on the removal of that button, set up this transition to animate. So now you get this sort of crossfade effect, where without having to apply any styles, this is the default. I actually think the default view transition, like crossfade, works in most cases. You get this like cool like crossfade effect. And so here, if I have like a playlist and I delete something, it'll just automatically reposition during this view transition. The browser can snapshot and then overlay the snapshot as this sort of crossfade effect. And this is cool for full page effects. I've seen a lot of demos that are full page effects as you transition, like you click on a blog post and the title kind of moves over into the next page and it smoothly animates. I also like them for inside of smaller components. So say you want to reorder a list or change elements inside of this list. I think that these are really powerful to use. And there's a lot of new features that are coming as well, like view transitions classes. So if you have used view transitions, you probably had to create a separate view transitions name for every single transition. That's changing, where you can set a view transitions class and reuse it. So that's also like a nicety, which would be very helpful for a long list of songs like this. This is a great demo by Maxi Ferreira, too, that shows that you can create these app-like effects. This one shows that the animation, this keeps moving, the media keeps playing as you transition, which is so, so cool to see. And I want to see more people implementing this, even as a progressive enhancement, because right now the experience might be you just click, you get the new page load. But with view transitions, especially with multi-page view transitions and cross-document, you can have a progressive enhancement for users who have support that smoothly animates into the next space. So shout out to Maxi for this demo. So the last thing I want to talk about briefly is stronger, resilient components. We have a couple of really awesome features that landed. Has is one of those features that recently landed cross-browser, and this lets you style parent elements. So it's like a parent selector. Have you all heard of the has selector? Raise your hand. This is really a poll. I'm here to do an in-person poll. OK, so looks like about half of you, and I hope to blow your mind for the ones who have not heard of this because it's so powerful. And this lets you style either parent elements based on the presence or state of its children, or siblings, or any adjacent elements. So as an example here, figure has fig caption is one of the most simple examples. You're looking for if this figure has a fig caption, like in this one, the Chromium logo is a fig caption, then I want to give it a border bottom, padding bottom. But you can also apply this to elements that are next to it. It's not just for the parent element. So I could say, so for the paragraph next to this element that has a fig caption, I don't know why I'd want to do this, but you could like create some kind of separation or styling. You can also combine this with the not function. So here you can say if the element does not have a fig caption. Oh, I think I broke it. Hold on, give me 1 second. Let me find the slide. View transitions. All right, here we are. Stronger resilient components has. See, doing it live. So if it does not have a fig caption, then it should swap over to, OK, I don't know what I did, but I might have broken it. Oh, not has. That's it. OK, so now this one that does not have a fig caption on the left shows that you can do all this kind of stuff, like combining these features. I use not and has all the time. So what's really cool, too, is that you could use this to then style elements. So in this case, I have this mailbox, and it has this list of items. This is tiny, but if I open up the DevTools, this item, it says if it has checked right here, then it will appear with a background of highlight. And this first one, let me click there. Let me make DevTools bigger. This is tiny. Item has star, then it gives it a background of this gray color. But also on the title, I can style any elements inside of it. So here on the title, if the element has a star, then increase the font weight of that little mailbox item. So you can really start to customize your UIs by implementing has. And you can do cool things like container or quantity queries as well by setting up the number of children using nth child and seeing if you have enough children inside of that element to actually style it differently. So an example of this is something that I actually had to implement in my last job, where I worked at a publisher, and at the bottom of some of the articles, we wanted to display credits. So if there were a few credits, like hair and makeup, clothing, like where we got it from, then we wanted it to be blocked. So 1, 2, 3, 4 after the other. If it was a lot of credits, like 20 credits for photography and models and everything, we wanted to show them next to each other, so it took up less space. It wasn't like a huge list of features. So to do that, we wanted to kind of list next to each other with like some kind of divider. So now it's pretty trivial to do that, because you can say if the unordered list has 5 or more children, then for all of them, add this spacer, this content between them, and display it inline. So you can start to really do these logical components by leveraging some of these new platform features. Also great for forms. Here, this example has a login form. If it has an invalid message, then show this error message, which is currently display none. So for the email, I could type something, that's not an email address. I get please try again. You can combine this with focus visible. So you can say if the email is not focused within and it has this invalid state, then and only then when it's not focused within, show the, that's apparently the browser thinks that's a valid email. So if it's not like the proper format and you're not focusing on it, then show that error message. So you can get more custom with error messages, like showing it for every single input type. And you can even use it for filtering. I cannot remember who the first person was that did this. I didn't invent this, but you can do filtering with has. So on my blog, I have filtering with has implemented, which is pretty cool. And it looks like this, so it looks kind of crazy. But what I'm looking for is that row on top is a bunch of checkboxes. And I have tags inside of the blogs themselves. So the tags are CSS, HTML, JavaScript, whatever I'm writing about. So I'm looking for if the post is, if it is checked, which is checked by default, and it has this data tag, so within that post there is data tag, then display block. If it doesn't, so if it's unchecked, then for the posts, which are an adjacent sibling to that checkbox, if it does not have checked, then for the posts that have that tag, do display none. So you get this effect where I could sort of click on and off, no scripting involved, no JavaScript, and just with CSS, like really powerful features here. So speaking of powerful features, I will go quickly. Container queries, I think, are a huge change and update to the web. You can do a ton with them. If you're not familiar, right now we really only have, before container queries, a way to query the full viewport. And with container queries, you could look within the viewport, so you can style an element based on its parent size, whether it's a card or in a sidebar or in a UI, say a product grid, which gives you a ton of control, especially for things like UIs like the Zillow UI, or if you have like scrubbing within the page to change size of things, which you cannot do with media queries. So in this example here, with this inbox, you see that date on top. I'm reapplying the layout, so I'm doing display none there, but it's also going to do it on the bottom ones, where now I'm combining media queries with container queries to do these little micro layouts for all of the UI that I want to do. And this is another example of the micro layouts where I have this like little new tag. And if I resize this, you can see there's one on the bottom right there too. That's going to readjust based on its size. And so is the top one. So based on the viewport size, it has more room now because the layout changed. And here, you can see that instead of looking at the viewport, it's looking within itself, within its parent, to apply the styles. I really like this one too, where we have these dates, and based on the spacing that the dates have, you can apply adjustments to the layout, to the sizing. If I make this even smaller, the whole layout will change, but the dates now have more space, so they can show in that wider view yet again. So a ton of stuff you can do. You can get as granular as like little buttons. And you can have responsive buttons inside of responsive cards, inside of responsive pages, and just like all of this control that you now have in your fingertips. Another cool thing I like to do is the fluid typography. I throw this in here because I remember the days where I had to have a whole library in jQuery to be able to do this kind of thing. And I no longer need to do this. I do this for my blog post for the headers, where I'm using one line of code. I'm using font size with clamp, where I have a minimum font size, 3 rems, a maximum font size, 5 rems, and then I am using the actual font size of the container query inline size. That's the container query width of the parent that I'm querying. So it's 8 CQI, and so it looks internally or into its parent to apply that size. Super, super handy little nuggets. And one last thing is app property, and I talk about this because it's so close that I can taste it. Landing cross-browser. This gets weirder and weirder as I get more time on stage. So this is currently planned for Firefox 126, which is landing soon. That's in June. And app property is super, super useful because you have so much control. It's like typing for your CSS properties. You get a syntax, initial value, which is default value, and set if it inherits or not, which can actually be a really beneficial performance benefit. Tailwind 4 recently updated their entire code base to leverage app property, despite the browser support now, because it is so powerful and has been such a big improvement for them in terms of performance and application and durability. So I really have to go fast. But anyway, you can use it, you can update it, and if it's invalid, you get the fallback value. So it is like type checking for CSS. Very, very valuable. And you can do cool things like animate backgrounds, which you couldn't before because they were known as images. So lots of cool stuff. There's also browser support that has been improving every day. One cool little quality of life improvement is now you can have range media queries instead of having to write things like max inline size and min inline size. You can just write it like this, which makes so much more sense. Inline size is less than or equal to 300 pixels and 600 pixels, something like that. HD colors and color functions bring so much vibrancy to the web. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but if I turn off the HDR colors and just use RGB, it's way more dull. There's this great tool, gradient.style, that you can play with this stuff, interpolating in different color spaces, which is something that you can do also in CSS using functions like color mix. So now you can use just in CSS, like the ability to mix in different color spaces and get color functions and create entire theming systems with one color. Nesting is look ahead now, so instead of having all of this stuff, modifiers, elements, different styles that are applied, container queries somewhere else in the page for specificity, you can put it all in one thing. And subgrid also landed. So another fun thing is this whole presentation is just no JavaScript, CSS and HTML with some iframes. You can style things like the body. This is all live, so I can give it a background of red if I want to. That's the first thing that came to mind. I could update all the code styles. It's also using scroll snap and different scroll capabilities and navigation with access keys. So I could just navigate with access key throughout the entire presentation, which is just leveraging the browser. Like knowing that these things exist make your life easier. CSS and HTML work in every framework. So if your company uses multiple frameworks, this can be the middle ground. This is an opportunity to really expand your mind if you haven't really been keeping up with the web UI space, because it can make your life easier. It reduces complexity, and it improves developer velocity. So to stay in the know, a couple of places you can go. Web.dev is one place for new stuff that lands in stable browsers, and developer.chrome.com for a few more of the experimental things. That is all that I have. Thank you so much for letting me go a little bit over. This has been great.